Welcome to the Planeswalker Project.
One of the most fun aspects of Commander is the ability to play high-costed spells that would otherwise have no playability in other formats. While it might not be too practical to run cards that cost 7 or more mana in a modern or standard deck, in Commander, casting these cards would be no problem. But what if I told you there was a way to cast these huge spells more easily? For an Izzet mage, huge explosives are our speciality. And while she might not be an official Izzet mage, Jhoira of the Ghitu offers a fun build where big spells drop for next to nothing. Originally printed in Future Sight and the original Modern Masters, Jhoira offers a very unique and powerful ability. For 2 mana of any color, you can exile a non-land card from your hand. That card gains 4 time counters and it gets Suspend. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a time counter, and upon the removal of the last counter, the card gets cast. If it's a creature, it gets haste. This is a super potent ability that opens up the door to play some of the biggest cards in the game. If you're willing to wait 4 turns or have some sneaky tricks to speed up the process, any spell you want can cast a mere 2 mana. Something to note with Jhoira is that suspended cards are still considered cast even if they are done so for free. So creatures with abilities that trigger upon the cast still go off, and if there are restrictions to casting spells or counter spells that can fizzle yours, they all will go off successfully. A lot of Jhoira decks utilize 3 main parts that we're going to look at today with our build. One of the most popular strategies is to use a selection of powerful Eldrazi, as well as a selection of Mass Destruction to ensure that the field is clear for our win conditions. The third part is a tutor package to move the spells we need to our hands for suspense later. Let's look at our big hitters. These are the threats that we'd be throwing at our opponents a lot sooner using Jhoira's ability, and will offer extremely potent abilities. We run the Eldrazi Titan Ulamog, both versions, and the original Kozilek. Pathrazer of Ulamog offers a powerful creature with some decent evasion, if you want to call it evasion and not utter annihilation. Ha ha ha, it's an Eldrazi joke. Void Winnower will hinder opponents' play severely, shutting down a good amount of their decks. Desolator Twin offers a powerful double threat in It That Betrays and Artisan of Kozilek. Both bring more of the Annihilator ability to the table. Breaker of Armies and Bane of Bala Ged are both newer Eldrazi, and finally, Conduit of Ruin doubles as an Eldrazi tutor. We also run some non-Eldrazi goodness. Perhaps the most potent of these to drop is the Blightsteel Colossus, who can kill an opponent outright in just 1 swing. Udvara Hellkite is a bit of an oddity in this deck, but it's a powerful threat that can give you a field full of dragons that spawn more dragons that will spawn more and more and more dragons. One thing to note about the cards with time counters on them is that those counters can be manipulated. We have 4 turns before our spells drop, and we can run methods to either hasten those cards getting into play or delay them for a more strategic drop. If an opponent has a way to react during your next turn but might not be able to do so on the following, you can use some of these cards to add either an extra counter to them or remove the counter to speed it up. Once that last counter is removed, the card is cast regardless of what turn it is and whether or not you can use it. So, to help mess with those time counters, we have Jhoira's Time Bug, Shivan Sandmage, and Time Bender. And while it can't add any counters itself, Rift Elemental is a great way to speed up those counters, and it buffs itself in the process. Time Crafting, Fury Charm, and Clockspinning are other useful interactive cards that help with time counters. Since we can remove time counters during our upkeep, the Paradox Haze will give us an additional upkeep step to remove an additional counter. Our next section is what will generally get most hate directed towards you. Fair warning, playing Jhoira and using this next group of cards will generally result in you not being too popular using Jhoira in the future. This section includes mass destruction spells. A fun thing to do with Jhoira is to have a destruction spell go off and then followed by some huge Eldrazi with haste onto a now empty board. And by destruction, I mean absolute total destruction. As in, no more board for anyone. Apocalypse might discard your hand, but if you have some spells that you can exile before discarding the rest, you'll be fine. Apocalypse also bypasses any indestructibility, as it's technically a mass exile spell. Blasphemous Act will kill off all but the largest Eldrazi, and might not even need the suspend trick to be able to hit the field quick enough. Chain Reaction is my personal favorite, and a nice smite to any creature token decks. Decree of Annihilation is a very vicious kill spell, and note that when you cycle a card, your opponent cannot counter a cycle. Obliterate is a less lethal wipe, not removing any enchantments or planeswalkers, but it being uncounterable makes it a good include. Lastly, and not quite a card I would recommend using ability of Jhoira to cast, is Cyclonic Rift, which is pretty much a staple in all blue decks, and it's not technically a board wipe per se. A few tutors will definitely help bring the spells you want to your hand as easily as possible. We have Fabricate for some artifact tutoring, Merchant Scroll for some blue instants, namely Mystical's tutor, which could grab just about any board wipe we may need at any given point. One last thing we do run in this deck, and potent to use with Jhoira's abilities, are extra turn cards. So things like Temporal Mastery, Temporal Trespass, each will give us an extra turn, and then my personal favorite, Time Stretch, will give us 2 extra turns. What's more fun than having a ton of huge creatures come down for little to no mana? A huge ton of creatures coming down during extra turns that don't give your opponents the chance to react. Alright, so we've covered a lot of powerful spells in this deck so far, but we need to take a look at the mana base. Extra mana is great, and almost a necessity, so we want to run cards like Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False God, Izzet Boilerworks, and Cascade Bluffs. We want to run our staple lands like our Shockland Steam Vents, and due to the higher number of basics in this deck, we do run quite a few fetch lands. Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, Misty Rainforest, Polluted Delta, and Scalding Tarn are our choices here. Of course, with this mana base and the deck in general, some of the more expensive cards can be substituted for more budget-friendly options until you can upgrade to the better ones. Jhoira is a really neat commander that can be about as budget as you want, or as intense as you can afford. She's a really cheap to cast commander at only 3 mana, so her being sniped off the board a few times won't hurt your ability to play her again too much. I hope you enjoyed this commander deck tech, and if you'd like to see more like this, remember to hit that like button to let us know, and finally, remember to subscribe for more Magic content such as this.